Institute. And I will now introduce our main speaker. Dr. Pollin is the Distinguished University Professor of Economics and co-director of the Political Economy Research Institute, also known as PERI, at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. He is the lead author of the PERI's recent report called The Impacts of Reimagine Appalachia and Clean Energy Transition Programs for West Virginia. He's also authored a number of books on green energy, green climate, and including books on living wage building a fair economy, and back to full employment and green growth. He also is president of Pollin Energy and Retrofits, an Amherst, Massachusetts-based green energy company. So without further introduction, I would like to introduce Dr. Pollin, who will be speaking to us about West Virginia's opportunities and challenges for a clean energy transition. Dr. Pollin.
Thank you very much, Michael, for introducing me, and thanks very much to Tom Rott for organizing this whole session. So as Michael said, I co-authored a study called Impacts of the Reimagine Appalachia and Clean Energy Transition Programs for West Virginia, Job Creation, Economic Recovery, and Long-Term Sustainability. I'd like to first acknowledge my co-authors on the study, and that's Jeanette Wicks-Lim, Shovik Chakraborty, and Gregor Semenuk. So the basic framework of the whole study is to advance a program for West Virginia that enables the state to move out of the COVID-based recession through a robust expansion of job opportunities, and at the same time to build a project of long-term sustainability in the state of West Virginia. Now, the foundation for the recovery will be the transition to a clean energy economy in West Virginia. And I say this in full recognition of the fact that doing so will be especially challenging for West Virginia, probably more so than any other state in the United States, given that West Virginia is the most coal-dependent state in the country. So coal employment itself, and I'll be talking about broader employment, coal employment itself is over 14,000 jobs. That's over 2.5% of all employment in the state. So that when we talk about this project of a clean energy transition for the state of West Virginia, front and center is the just transition feature. That is that the project takes into full account the conditions for the workers and communities in the states that are presently dependent on the fossil fuel industry, starting with coal, and to move them into viable situations. So that's going to be, as I will emphasize as I go on, a centerpiece of the whole project. Now, the three basic pillars of this clean energy project are first, that if we are going to think about a clean energy transition for West Virginia, as in the United States, as in the world, that means that we have to cut emissions. A climate stabilization program for West Virginia, for the US, for the world, first and foremost must mean cutting emissions of carbon dioxide. And the way we get carbon dioxide emissions is by burning coal, oil, and natural gas to produce energy. So that we have to simply cut back on burning coal, oil, and natural gas to produce energy. It's nothing against the state of West Virginia. It's just, if we want to save the planet, this is what we have to do. And this is now increasingly acknowledged even by the head of the Coal Miners Union, that this is a transition that has to take place. Now, and I understand that there's a lot of skepticism in West Virginia among people in the coal industry and elsewhere, oh, that this is all fine talk from professors and all that, but nobody really believes it's actually going to happen. Well, it has to happen, and it has to be the centerpiece. So we're going to cut consumption of oil, coal, and natural gas in West Virginia and elsewhere, which means we are going to cut production of oil, coal, and natural gas in West Virginia and elsewhere. Now, at the same time, we're going to build out the clean energy system in West Virginia, and that means investments in renewable energy and energy efficiency to replace fossil fuels. We also include in our study a complementary program for investments to build up the infrastructure in West Virginia, to advance manufacturing in the state, to focus on land restoration and agriculture. So that's the whole program. Now let me talk about the features of it a bit. The clean energy transition starts with investments in energy efficiency. And that means efficiency, raising efficiency in the operations of buildings, every building, your home, schools, office buildings. It means efficiency in transportation systems, meaning hybrid vehicles, electric vehicles, and public transportation to enable more people to go from point A to point B efficiently. And it means industrial efficiency. It means the operations of all the equipment that is done in West Virginia to produce your goods and services. Now, this has to be the first step in West Virginia, because as it happens, West Virginia is operating at a level of efficiency that is half that of the average of the US. And that's actually an underestimate, half that. So in other words, for West Virginia to even come up to the average level of other states in the United States would produce tremendous benefits in terms of reducing emissions before you do anything about transforming the types of energy you rely on to raise efficiency standards. So a lot of the investments that I'm talking about entail investments to raise efficiency standards in buildings, in transportation, and in industry. Okay, so that's step one. Step two is, yes, to invest in rebuilding an energy system based on renewable energy, primarily solar, wind power, but also geothermal power and other resources. Now, in our model for this study, we've estimated the overall cost of that at about $3.5 billion per year, which is about a little over 4% of the state's GDP. This program is actually in close alignment with a very good study that came out from the West Virginia University Law School in December 2020, which is called West Virginia's Energy Future, ramping up renewable energy. And this is an important part of their subtitle, ramping up renewable energy to decrease costs, reduce risks, and strengthen economic opportunities in West Virginia. So our study is in full alignment with this work done by scholars at the West Virginia University College of Law on West Virginia's energy future. Okay, now if we undertake this project in West Virginia, and by the way, what I've scaled into this investment model that West Virginia will remain as an energy exporter. Right now, West Virginia is a major energy exporter, moving electricity to other states after you burn the coal to produce the electricity. West Virginia can keep doing that on the foundation of renewable energy. Now, what we estimate is that we're going to get about 25,000 jobs in the state through this project. 25,000 jobs. So the level of employment today is going to increase by about 25,000 jobs. And these will be opportunities across the board, okay? There will be jobs in construction. There will be jobs for vehicle mechanics, material scientists, secretaries, accountants, truck drivers, operating engineers, as I said, across the board. In addition, as I talked about, we also include this in investments in infrastructure, manufacturing, land restoration, and agriculture. And this includes things like universal broadband, which I know you don't have now, traditional infrastructure, farmland conservation, water management, and plugging abandoned oil and gas wells. Now we've scaled that at about $1.5 billion per year, and you get about 16,000 jobs from that. Now, so if you add up the clean energy investments and the investments in manufacturing, infrastructure, agriculture, land restoration, we're talking about $5 billion per year in investments, and it will generate over 40,000 jobs per year. That's about 5% of the workforce. So to scale that, right now in West Virginia, your unemployment rate is about 6%, 5.8%. If we were to enact this program tomorrow, which of course, realistically, we don't enact the whole thing right away, but we would drive the unemployment rate down to 1% or thereabouts. Now, you know, there will be other complications, but basically the point is you can drive unemployment down to where West Virginia operates as a near full employment economy. Now for the fossil fuel contraction and just transition. We look at the entire array of employment in the fossil fuel economy in West Virginia. So it's not just coal, it's oil and gas as well. And it's the support industries for oil and gas and other things. It's petroleum refining, pipeline transport, pipeline construction, fossil fuel-based electric power generation. Okay, so here we've got about 40,000 people in all of these areas of employment. So as I said, we are talking about contracting by 50% within 10 years by 2030 in order to hit the emission reduction target. So that means we've got roughly 40,000 jobs. It's going to go down to roughly 20,000 jobs. Now, those 20,000 jobs also will not disappear right away. It will be a 10-year transition. So average it out to about 2,000 jobs per year. We also look at the demographics of this, and what we estimate that of the 2,000 jobs per year, maybe something in the range of 600 will be people who will voluntarily retire, who will reach retirement age at around 65 and will want to retire. Okay, so we then have about 1,400 jobs of people who will in fact be displaced. Their jobs will be displaced, and we must commit to finding better new situations for them that are at least as good as the ones they have now. It's not going to be that hard. Why? Well, for one thing, as I just said, the investment program in clean energy, manufacturing, infrastructure, land restoration, that's going to create about 40,000 jobs. So we're going to create 40,000 jobs, but then we're going to displace 1,400 per year. So we guarantee jobs for all 1,400 workers every year. It can be in clean energy. It doesn't have to be. It can be in land restoration. It doesn't have to be, but we guarantee them jobs. And we guarantee them not only jobs, but their pensions. And we guarantee that their wages will stay at least at the level that they're at now. As needed, they will also be able to access retraining and relocation. But the job guarantee is central so that the retrain, it's not like you get retrained and then you say, well, good luck, buddy, go find yourself a job with your new skills. The retraining will be tied to the new jobs. Okay, so this is a robust just transition program. And it's going to cost money, and we've costed it out. We've estimated it. And we've estimated it would be about $126,000 per worker. Every worker gets it who faces displacement. Overall, it would cost something like $150 million. Now, when we estimate that $150 million per year, that turns out to be It's a lot of money in some ways, but it's 0.02% of the state's GDP. Easy, easy, easy. You can finance this easily as long as you have the political commitment. We also have to think about community transition. We have already on the books programs for land reclamation, the Abandoned Mine Land Management Program, which has been around since 1977. The basics are there. It's just there's not enough money in it. There has to be a bigger commitment. We also have programs that have been reasonably successful in terms of worker and community transition. We have a program that was applied to the communities that were associated with the decommissioning of nuclear power, uranium creation. There's one in Piketown, Ohio, which is a neighboring state. It's a successful program, decommissioning a weapons-grade uranium facility. It's employing right now, it's employing 1,900 workers, unionized workers in this decommissioning program that's taking decades. Another relevant example, the center of the coal mining industry in Germany was the Ruhr Valley, so the equivalent of West Virginia. They have been very active and successful in converting abandoned coal mines into other things, including, for example, one important example, converting it into a hydro reservoir, wherein they run water down into the abandoned mine when you have a deficiency of energy, and let's say at nighttime. During the day, when you have a lot of sunlight, you run the water back up. This project is large enough to provide electricity for 400,000 homes. This is the kind of thing, I'm not saying it's exactly the thing, it's the kind of thing that West Virginia can really advance. Finally, how do you pay for all this? Let me just talk about the Biden program right now that's in debate, the American Jobs Plan. If West Virginia were to get only its share of the Biden plan as being discussed now, based on population, you'd get about $2 billion per year. And as I said, the whole program is about $5 billion per year. So you've already got 40% covered if we assume you only get money based on your population. But of course, West Virginia should get more than its share based on population, because West Virginia is going to be disproportionately impacted negatively by the transition, because you are a fossil fuel dependent state. And yes, you do have Senator Manchin, who actually has a massive amount of leverage right now. So I would envision that most of this program can be financed by whatever version of the Biden proposal, the American Jobs Plan, gets enacted over the next couple of months. I think it's really critical for people to lobby Senator Manchin to see the massive benefits for the state of recognizing that the globe is in transition to new energy resources. This is an opportunity for West Virginia to be front and center in terms of providing new opportunities in the state, good jobs in the state, and West Virginia should get more than its share of population. In addition, West Virginia, the state can supplement the funding through borrowing. Right, I just checked before our session. West Virginia, on average, can borrow at less than 2% today. That you should lock in that 2% and borrow what you need to supplement with what comes out of the American Jobs Plan. So overall, this is an opportunity to establish a robust recovery out of the COVID recession and to build for a sustainable future that means good jobs, that means reclaiming the land, restoring the land, and repurposing and creating a viable clean energy economy for the state of West Virginia. Thank you.
Professor, thank you very much for that presentation. Let me be sure that I now introduce a little more formally our panelists that have joined us here today. First, we have Jeff Young. He's the managing editor of the Ohio Valley Resource. Hey, Jeff. The Ohio Valley Resource is a regional journalistic collaborative helped and sponsored in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, emphasizing economic and social change in Kentucky, Ohio, and West Virginia. Jeff has reported throughout the Appalachian coal fields, Capitol Hill, New England, was previously with the West Virginia Public Broadcasting. He has a good West Virginia background, growing up near Huntington, West Virginia, and studying journalism and biology in Marshall University and the University of Charleston. I'd also like to welcome a little more formally Ted Bettner. He's the senior researcher for the Ohio River Valley Institute. The Ohio River Valley Institute is an independent nonprofit research and communication center, basically a think tank, that was founded in 2020. The institution's goal is to equip the region's residents and decision makers with policy research and policy proposals that they need to advance long-term solutions to some of our Appalachian challenges. Prior to joining the Ohio River Valley Institute, Ted was the founder, executive director of the West Virginia Center on Budget and Policy. So welcome, Ted. So what I'll first do is turn over to our panelists, just kind of a general question. Having heard the professor, is there any initial reaction or comments that you want? And before you answer that, let me remind everybody, please go ahead and type in any questions in the Q&A. We've already got a couple, and we'll get to those as best we can also. So Ted and Jeff, take it away.
Ted, we'll go alphabetically. You can go first.
Awesome. Well, thanks. So it's such an honor to have Bob with us today. I've admired his work for so long, and this report, I think, is so important to the state. And to me, one of the aims of the report was to show that it is possible for a state that is heavily reliant on fossil fuel jobs to move toward a cleaner, less carbon-intensive economy and grow jobs. And I was just going to ask Bob, like, do you feel that West Virginia can make that transition, and that if it fails to do so, more economic distress could be in its future? So in other words, would it be better for workers and communities in West Virginia to implement the policies in your report, or continue along its current trajectory, leaving the issue of climate change impacts to the side?
So I think it's really imperative. I mean, it obviously doesn't have to be exactly what I wrote or what my co-authors wrote, but I think it's really imperative for the well-being of people and communities in the state to recognize that this transition is happening. It's going to happen, and see the opportunity, like the study that was done by the law school, to see it as an opportunity for the state. I mean, among other things, which I didn't mention or just briefly mention, this will lower energy costs for all consumers in the state, because as I said, you are operating, and I had no clue of this before I did the study. You're operating at a level of efficiency that's half the efficiency of the US average, to say nothing of being anywhere close to states that are at a very high efficiency level. You're way off from the average. So just to move to the average in terms of business opportunities, it's going to mean lower costs for doing business in the state. And that's something that happens right away. You know, if you put in an electric heat pump to replace your failing, heating and cooling system, you get your benefits tomorrow. So I think it's a great opportunity for the state. And let's face it, you have at this moment, you have a senator who has enormous leverage and can take advantage of that leverage and get a whole lot of this whole program paid for by the federal government. And you deserve it.
I would just first echo and emphasize a couple of those points. I mean, it seems to me in our reporting around the region on energy and environment, what we see over and over again is we're already getting a lot of the negatives of an energy transition without having the positives possible from a planned or policy-driven transition. I mean, consider way more than half of all the coal produced in this country is now being produced by a coal company that is either in bankruptcy or recently emerged from bankruptcy. And we're just seeing one coal power plant closure after another, after another. I'm in Louisville right now, right across the river in southern Indiana. We just saw another big one close down. There were 3 in Pennsylvania and Maryland that just announced early closure in the past couple of weeks. To your point, the transition is happening. The question is, are we going to reap any of the positive benefits of taking advantage of this? And so I think overcoming that speaks to another point that you raised, Dr. Pollin, and that is the deep skepticism, which is just, palpable when you speak to people in the region, even, coal miners who know the jig is up, right? They see the writing on the wall. They know what's happening, but they also know they don't have 10 years or 5 years or whatever it is to retrain and get a new career. So here's my question. What do you think would be the most important thing out of the gate for, say, the Biden administration to demonstrate that this is real, that the positive things that you're talking about with the report are possible, and help overcome that skepticism and win more people over? What are the most important things?
Great. So, of course, I'm not an expert in politics or general communications, but I'll give you my impressions. I've encountered this many times, and I completely respect the perspectives of people who present this to me. And here's the kind of thing I've gotten. Okay, professor, great, you've got this study, I love big numbers, and that sounds really good, but it's not going to happen. And you're going to have your job, and I'm not going to have my job. And you're going to keep writing your reports and getting paid to write your reports, but I'm not going to have my job. So what do you say to that? So that, and I have to say that it's a completely legitimate concern, because we do not have on record just transition programs that have been successful. I cited some examples of ones that have been, but on balance, we have not experienced that. With trade adjustment assistance, I know the phrase coming out of the labor movement that they call it burial insurance. That's what it is. It's not really helping people to sustain or improve their standard of living. So I think that Biden, let's just say purely on the basis of politics, purely on the basis of persuading your senator, you put the just transition program first. As I calculated it, I could be off, maybe I'm off 20, 30%. But I mean, mine is it's a robust program. Everybody is guaranteed another job. They're guaranteed a pension. They're guaranteed their wages. If they need retraining, they've got it. If you need relocation, though we don't want people to have to move out of their communities, you've got it. Okay. $150 million? Nothing. So why doesn't Biden say that's the first thing, Senator Manchin? We're putting this in, let's pass it. And everybody's going to vote for that. You probably even get Mitch McConnell to vote for that. So that would be the first step. And then people see this is for real. And then we can move forward with the other features. But you have to make sure that people understand that the just transition is real. If people don't believe it, and there's good reasons not to believe it, then yeah, you get skepticism and you get people thinking this is just going to take away my livelihood. And as you all know way better than me, these fossil fuel jobs are pretty good jobs on balance, and they pay more than the average clean energy job at present. That's because you have this long decades of people organizing to make them decent jobs. Being a coal miner was not exactly a glamorous job. Coal Miners Union made it a decent job. So we have to have similar organizing initiatives around the clean energy transition. And then people will see it could be really something beneficial.
All right, Professor and panelists, we have a couple of questions from our attendees here today that are kind of drilling down on what kind of jobs and the type of jobs that you're talking about. One of the questions says that many of the jobs that you mentioned, such as land reclamation, plugging wells, short-term construction, are just that. They're short-term. What other types of long-term job prospects can be developed out of this kind of just transition?
Well, first of all, they're not short-term. Yes, of course, project to project, well to well, specific land area to specific land area, they're short-term. But when you add it all up and you say this is a real transition program and it's going to take 10, 20, 30 years, it's not short-term. I mean, let's say we are going to retrofit to raise energy efficiency in every single public building or every single office building in the state. Of course, each building to building, maybe it takes 4 months, but you've got a lot of buildings. So that's going to take a decade or two. So it's not the case that the overall activity in construction is going to be short-term, even if any given project is short-term. And the same goes for if we think about things like broadband development. Yes, it will end, but it'll take a couple of years before you get broadband high-speed access throughout the state. So those things will be rolling through. There will also be, jobs in, for example, one of the areas is manufacturing development, research and development, and then the promotion of manufacturing. One of the things that we talked about, not so much with respect to West Virginia per se, but through the whole Appalachian area, is investing in, for example, bioplastic as an alternative to fossil fuel-based plastics that would be a permanent new industry that around which the Appalachian economy could be organized. So that would be the range. I mean, it is the case that once you have built your clean energy economy, the maintenance work is going to be less than the 40,000 jobs per year that I'm talking about. But as it is, when we talk about your existing fossil fuel jobs, they're going to be going away, but they're going away at, let's say, 1,500 jobs per year. So we have to more than match that 1,500 jobs, and then anything above that is going to be an expansion of jobs in the state.
And I'd like the panelists to weigh in on this. What kind of jobs, and are they going to be long-term, and what type of thing? But just to ask another question that came from the panel, that came from the audience, is there some provision in your proposal to prioritize that people that lose their job through fossil fuel are going to have set-asides and they're going to get these new jobs? And then I'd ask the panelists to jump in on the job creation portion of it.
Yeah, this is an absolute job guarantee. I mean, guarantee means 100% guarantee. It's the law. You get people another job. So those roughly 1,400 people per year that during the phase down will be guaranteed employment. It's easy to envision them getting employment in the new investment areas, if for no other reason that a very high proportion of the spending is going to be public spending. So that's part of the package of the public spending, that there are job set-asides. It doesn't have to be the case that these jobs are going to be in clean energy, as I said before, because there's going to be jobs created in a lot of ancillary industries and then spillover. So, if we can get something in the range of 40,000 new jobs continuing over the course of this decade, there will be, huge opportunities to find guaranteed employment. And it must be guaranteed. And it must be, as I said, their pensions have to be guaranteed and their wages have to be guaranteed. That's the way that I've at least laid out this transition program.
Jeff, Ted, if you'd like to join in.
Sure. So, we have this podcast going on where we're talking about energy transition in coal country. quick plug, it's called Welcome to Appalachia, America. Check it out. So in the course of that, we've interviewed Gina McCarthy, the White House climate advisor, our new energy secretary, Jennifer Granholm, and just recently, Brian Anderson, West Virginia guy, who is leading this interagency working group with a name as long as my arm, I can't remember, but the goal is to reinvigorate coal communities and power plant host communities. And each of them, to a person, talks about this notion of how do we make sure that the investments go to these places that are most vulnerable to further job losses and further losses of revenue from the decline of fossil fuels. So they have several mechanisms in the works to do that, but it seems to me that they are tied to whatever legislation is going to emerge. And that brings me to another question. Here we are in this, second round of negotiations over the infrastructure bill after the earlier negotiations featuring Senator Capito came to naught. Now we have Senator Manchin playing a pivotal role there. You've mentioned him as, being a power broker, obviously. He's the Joe who really runs things in DC, apparently. So what do you think? Does having Manchin in the mix make it more or less likely that the key elements for a just transition and for our climate goals will be included in that infrastructure bill?
Again, I'm really not an expert in the politics, and I don't know Senator Manchin at all. I just read what everybody else does. We did have a session with Senator Manchin's staff after this study came out. The only thing I can say is, he is representing you all. He is representing the state. This is his opportunity. He can go down in history as being the person who moved West Virginia onto a new sustainable path and a new higher level of prosperity. He's got it right there in the palm of his hands. As I said, if my estimates are even approximately right, we're looking at a range of $5 billion a year. If West Virginia only got its share of the Biden program based on population, we're at $2 billion. So he should be able to get you up to $4 billion easily, because we're talking about a program that's in the range of $200 billion a year, and he has the political power, the leverage to do it, and it's the right thing to do. It wouldn't be very hard to persuade people in other states that West Virginia should get a disproportionate share based on the fact that you have a disproportionate challenge. So I think Manchin should really embrace this. It's the opportunity of really the generation. It could be a generational transition for the state, and he could be the one who really facilitates it more than anybody else. I don't know, Ted.
Yeah, don't make me answer the political question either. But yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. We're definitely in a situation where that could certainly happen. And one of the things that you talked about in the report, I think the American Jobs Plan, I think the figure might have been around 2.5 billion, just based on the allocation for West Virginia. Right. And just putting that in context for folks too, that like the GDP of our oil and gas industry in West Virginia is 2.9 billion. So this is a lot of money. Can generate a lot of jobs. But one question I had for you too, Bob, was fossil fuel jobs have high multipliers, usually higher than clean energy jobs. So if you take away some of these dirty energy jobs that have high multipliers and replace them with some of these clean energy jobs that do not, do you come out ahead, do you think?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, so the job estimates that we report here include what you're calling job multipliers, which is exactly the right term, but just in case not everybody's taking economics. What we mean here is when we spend money, for example, for people to build a solar farm, you're putting money in their pockets and they go out and spend it. A high proportion of what they spend will be spent within West Virginia, and that will create further jobs. So the estimate that I have of 40,000 jobs includes those multiplier effects. So in fact, they are, I mean, they're not dramatically lower in terms of multiplier effects. I mean, there may be some differences in the composition. And I think Tom Rod wrote me before our session about the fact that, okay, you've got a lot of transportation jobs tied up in the fossil fuel industry with transportation of coal through rail and so forth, and trucking. And what about those jobs? Well, you will get a lot of transportation jobs in the clean energy projects. They won't be exactly the same. I haven't estimated, maybe I could. I haven't estimated how many would be, say, the rail transport versus truck transport and so forth. But I think you're going to get, that 40,000 jobs includes these multipliers.
Okay. One thing I was going to add to Jeff's comment real quick too, a lot of the bills, and I think Bob, you might have talked about this in the report too, and President Biden's talked about, including, project labor agreements in the bills or prevailing wage provisions, like for the AML work, the abandoned mine lands work, or capping oil and gas wells. And these provisions too, and also passing things like the PRO Act that make it much more easier to form unions can dramatically, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, Bob, but can't that really increase the economic impact of all of this locally in the community?
Oh yeah. So again, the simple economics of all this. So, let's say we're paying somebody $20 an hour in their new job in clean energy, and then they're going to spend 15 of it in their community, let's say. But if you're making $25 an hour, you will spend 20, let's say. So so the multiplier effects grow to the extent that these jobs pay well. So and certainly in our study, we do emphasize that those things that you mentioned in terms of the commitments to wages, benefits, unionization rights, and so forth. And again, these projects will have a lot of leverage around that because a lot of them are public sector jobs. And if they're not public sector jobs, they are going to be subsidized by public funds. And that therefore you can establish these standards in terms of hiring provision.
All right, let me just a couple of things. Somebody has raised their hand. We don't have really a capacity to call on you, so if you could type in your question in the Q&A section, that would be great. And also, Jeff, one of the people asked for the podcast name. If you could just type that into chat or type a link into the Q&A part, that would be great.
Will do, thank you.
Sure, thanks. Let's talk a little bit about the subject that you all don't want to talk about, which is kind of the political will. And Professor, you said there has to be a political will to do this. And let me play the devil's advocate. We're in West Virginia with a supermajority. We have a very great tie to coal as part of our history and our political background. Senator Manchin, who you place a lot of trust in, is putting forth that coal has to be part of the solution through technology of clean coal. So how do you build that political will? Is it a process of bringing in the labor unions that have now started to endorse these kind of transition problems? How do we build that political will?
Well, again, I'm not a true expert on this, but we had our session, we had a press session and then a session with Senator Manchin's staff. And the union leadership was there. And I consider that a major breakthrough. It's one thing, and of course I have huge respect for environmentalists, especially in places where it's not as popular as other places. So all of you that are doing work around environmental issues in West Virginia are really at the forefront. But connecting with labor is the way through which we really start to see, I think, a major movement politically. And I don't say I put a lot of trust in Senator Manchin. per se. Again, I don't know him, and I'm just saying he has in the palm of his hands a historic opportunity. Now, okay, should coal be part of the long-term solution? That would entail this technology called carbon capture, where you still burn coal or natural gas. You capture the carbon at the smokestack. You convert it maybe to liquid. Maybe you then bury it underground, or maybe you recycle it. I'm not opposed to it per se. The problem, the immediate problem with it, is that there's no evidence that it works at commercial scale. We can talk about it all we want, but the coal companies that Jeff is referring to that are bankrupt or going bankrupt, the fossil fuel companies that are not yet bankrupt but are seeing the handwriting on the wall, they're desperate to have a technology of carbon capture that really works, that delivers energy, clean energy at a relatively affordable price. And they've been at it for decades and they still haven't gotten it to work. So for the next decade, we have to go with other things. And if in 15 years we have commercialized carbon capture, well, sure, then that can be some part of the solution. I myself personally am skeptical, but I'm open to it if somebody can prove that it works. I know there's a version of it, carbon capture with recycling, so that you don't have to bury it. You liquefy the carbon and you use it as a liquid source of energy. Technology that's being developed by a well-known Harvard physicist, financed by Bill Gates. And even he says he doesn't know if it's ever going to work. This is the guy developing it. And of course, so I think we have to be fair, we have to be skeptical, whereas we know solar and wind and geothermal work. In fact, the cost of solar energy generated from solar panels has come down by 80% in the last 9 years, which is absolutely phenomenal. According to the US Energy Department today, solar energy is by 2026 is estimated to be half the price of coal with carbon capture. That's from the US Energy Department. And that study came out in February, so it had to have been done work done under Trump. So they're estimating solar in 2026 at about 3.5 cents, and they're estimating coal with carbon capture at over 7 cents per kilowatt hour. That tells me let's really focus on solar, because it's also coming down. And the carbon capture with coal, we don't even know if it's ever going to work.
Ted or Jeff, would you like to add on some of the political realities of what we're dealing with here?
Well, just a quick comment on the carbon capture and storage question. I'm old enough to remember FutureGen. When I worked in DC, that was like the big centerpiece program. And one of the skeptics in the room said, yeah, it's the centerpiece, just like the centerpiece on your table. It serves no purpose. It's purely decorative. And
good one. I got to remember that.
That's largely proved to be true. I don't know. It does work in a technical sense, but you've hit the nail on the head. It's like, does it work at scale? No, they have absolutely nothing to show for it after decades of investment in CCS in terms of applying it to coal. However, I do think it might have promise in terms of application for other heavy industry that is otherwise really hard to decarbonize. So you could see, for example, and I think there's noise about doing this in Europe somewhere. I'm sorry, I can't remember the specifics, but some, hub of associated heavy industries, all of which, depend on, whether it's steel making or cement making or something, depend on fossil fuels, and they would centralize their decarbonization, their carbon capture and storage, and that it might be applicable in that sense. But as I look at it, even if it works at scale for power generation, it's going to be applied to natural gas before it's applied to coal. And natural gas is already what's driving a stake through the heart of coal. So no, it's not going to save coal. I just don't see it. Perhaps in the international forum, international arena, there is an application for it. You know, if China and India and et cetera say, look, we're not going to stop burning this coal. Maybe the answer is to super heavily subsidize carbon capture and storage for those coal burning. But in the United States, I just don't see any future for it as applied to coal.
Ted?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the comments about CCS too. I mean, I think, the latest study I saw last year, I think it more than doubled the cost of the electricity production for coal if you do that. I think it was an MIT study. But, you know, in terms of the political implications too, you know, I think nobody has the answer to that. All we can do is keep on building support in our communities and, you know, talking to people as well. I mean, I think it would be just a huge mistake for the senator's legacy not to, you know, swing at the ball here. I always think of this, I feel like Barry Bonds is in the World Series going up to plate and decides he's just not going to swing the bat or swing it only one ball every at bat. You know, and that would, you know, I think hopefully appealing to the better nature and working on creating a legacy for the state, because there's no doubt that if Bob Byrd or Senator Rockefeller was in his place, that they would definitely be bringing as much, you know, Bob Byrd did as much to the state, because as Bob said in the report, we're the most vulnerable to this energy transition. But one of the best things about West Virginia in terms of energy too, we haven't dug in as much to natural gas electricity production. So we can actually kind of leapfrog from coal into renewable energy without going, you know, without doing that. And that's a real opportunity, I actually think, to get into these other renewable energy production things that Bob talked about.
Great, thank you. There was a comment made in the question and answer that there was a news coverage today that up to 100,000 acres in Ohio, I think on the Bill Gates farm, was potentially going to be turned into solar power. And so that is something that is happening in the Ohio Valley type of area. Let me, in our last couple of minutes before we have closing comments from our speaker and our panelist, we've talked a lot about federal policy and not a political will question, but what kind of state policies, what do we need the state of West Virginia to do to help make these kinds of federal programs and federal funding for these transitions actually work?
So I'm going to mainly defer to my experts in the state, but I will just say this in terms of thinking about these. What needs to be done is, you know, we need to invest and create this alternative energy system, period. So it should be a combination of federal policy, state policy, and private investment. In fact, in our study, and I didn't emphasize this, most of the investment that I'm talking about in terms of the clean energy, I'm assuming is coming from the private sector, subsidized, incentivized, regulated into being by the public sector, but it's not just a federal program by any means. So the point is, this is what we need to do to hit the emission targets and to generate jobs in the state in terms of investments. And then let's work backwards in terms of what are the specific policies that will enable us to get there. I think that's a more productive way of thinking in general than what often happens in policy discussions is this program at the federal level, this program at the state level, and we're never sure whether we're going to hit the target. So my aim is we laid out how you can hit the target. I think most of it, the public funds that's necessary should come from federal. The rest should be the state. The state can, right now, again, that may not be the case in a year and a half, but right now the state could borrow at 2%. So take advantage.
Yeah. Jeff, Ted, anything you want to say about state policy to make this happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an enormous amount of state policies. We're not lacking of ideas. You know, other mineral-rich states like Wyoming, New Mexico, Alaska, they created huge mineral trust funds. You know, Wyoming has $22 billion in sovereign wealth money. We have zero. These things were talked about for years and they never happened. You know, and just to give you one idea, I mean, we have just really simple. I mean, we have a a thin seam coal tax credit. So we have a lower severance tax rate for thin seam coal, and almost as all metallurgical coal, and that sells for anywhere from $85 to $150 a ton. You know, if we took that up to 5%, you could take that money and put it into a fund to help, you know, coal miners transition. And when you think about Bob's number too, of what he talked about, it just, you know, I think it was 140 million, Bob, for the whole package for transition. I mean, you know, we got rid of our business franchise tax several years ago when Senator Manchin was governor. That was 150 million. We cut the corporate net income tax by 75 million. We cut the coal severance tax by over 50 million. In this past session, we cut oil and gas property taxes by 50 million. So we're not lacking the resource. I mean, we easily could fund the thing that Bob just talked about at the state level. But I tend to totally agree with Bob in terms of the action being at the federal level. I mean, one good piece is our governor, Governor Justice, did send a letter to Senator Manchin, the Natural Resource Committee, endorsing the Regrow Act, which would probably bring, you know, $200 to $300 million to the state of West Virginia to plug and reclaim oil and gas wells. So that's one little step in the right direction. So there is some movement in that, but, you know, I think a lot of these issues require heavy federal investment because West Virginia is a, you know, fiscally poor state, and I can't think of another state that's given more to the American dream and given less in return. So,
thank you very much. I'm going to thank the panelist and our speaker. What I'm going to ask now is just kind of a final comment or thought, and now we'll go in reverse alphabetical order. And so, Jeff, if you go first, and then Ted, and we'll let the professor have the last word.
Well, first of all, thank you all for putting this together. This has really been fascinating. You know, I think this reinforces both the very smart questions that I was reading and hearing from the participants here, and the remarks we heard from Dr. Pollin and Ted. You know, just reinforces a lot of what we see in our reporting, and that is this general understanding, I think, by the population that they know we need something different. They know we need something new. However, there's this huge gap between where I think most of our people are in West Virginia and in this broader region, coal-producing region of Central Appalachia. You look at some of the numbers from the Yale Center on Climate Change Communication. There's widespread agreement in this region, in this coal-producing region, that we should control carbon emissions, that we should tax carbon emissions, that we should invest in clean energy. So there's all this potential political energy coming up from the grassroots, strong support for infrastructure investment. My gosh, people are living with crumbling infrastructure. You can't get a clean glass of water in Martin County, Kentucky, because their drinking water system is completely collapsed. How many billions of dollars in mineral wealth did Martin County provide for this nation over the years that we were mining coal there? And yet managed to capture very little of that wealth to reinvest in their infrastructure. So long story short, I think the problem we have to overcome is, you know, that gap between where I think most of our people really are on these issues and where a lot of our political leadership is. And you know, putting the dollars and cents by it and putting the clear policy by it, as we've seen in evidence tonight, I think is a really, you know, that's the way to do it. That's the way to do it. It's like, here, I'm proving it. You can do this. Now go do it. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Jeff. Ted, a final thought?
Yeah, that's really, I mean, I think this report is so important too, because as you know, playing in West Virginia politics and policy for the last 15 years, how many times have we read articles in the Gazette or the State Journal saying, oh, we cannot transition, we cannot make the turn into a clean energy, renewable economy. And I think what the really granular detail of work that Bob has done here has really showed us that it is possible to do that in a state like West Virginia. And I think the cost of doing nothing is going to be far terrible than any type of transition. And, you know, I think we are at a really crucial moment and opportunity today to make this big investment and to move. And we need to be as loud as possible to make that happen. But I think there's so much value in, you know, looking at these ideas that folks have and that are included in Bob's report that give us that intellectual ammunition to know that we can do this in West Virginia and that the naysayers are wrong. So I think that's so important, and just thank Bob for helping us put that together.
Thank you, Ted. Professor, what's the final thought you want our attendees to walk away with
Well,
tonight?
I would just say that, I'm really impressed by the infrastructure of people, groups, community groups that have been working on this issue in West Virginia and the region. So reclaim, Reimagine Appalachia, the West Virginia Center on Budget and Policy, the Ohio River Valley Institute, West Virginia Law School study, which was excellent. I mean, really, we built off of this and the work of a lot of other people. So I just think that, the path forward is pretty clear. It's unambiguous where the opportunities are. And yes, it's an imperative in terms of the climate crisis, but it's also this massive opportunity for the state. So I really respect the efforts of all of you and the people that you've been working with to try to make this clear and to deliver this new generation of well-being for the state and the region.
Thank you very much. And I would like to thank our two panelists for giving us their time tonight, Jeff Young and Ted Bettner. Special thanks to our speaker, Dr. Robert Pollin, and a very special thanks to everybody that attended. I hope that you found it informative. I'd like to thank our co-sponsors for this summer series, the West Virginia Center on Climate Change, the West Virginia College of Law Center on Energy and Sustainable Development, and the West Virginia Climate Alliance. And I would like to thank all of you for attending. Our next seminar is on July 13th. It's on our website to sign up. So we hope to see everybody again on July 13th. And thank you all for your time, and participants and speaker. We appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye.